Hi, everybody. Welcome to Susan Lax and Friends again. I'm really excited to have you in my library, my office, and I feel like you're in my home. I wish I could offer you a cup of coffee. Last time we spoke, I was in my home in Tel Aviv, and I remember thinking that I wish I could show you the view from where I was sitting. And that's what I'm sitting with right now in my heart is the view of the beach and the calmness. And I just wanted to share that with you today. So envision a beach and the calm sands, and let's go into this conversation today. So at this time of year, when there are a lot of holidays coming and going, we meet up with a lot of people and family and friends, and we also meet up with a lot of emotions. And some of those emotions are amazing and they're wonderful and they're joyous and they're laughter. And some of those emotions can be sadness or grief or loss because it's a date. And we all know when there is a date that comes up, our heart goes, wait, what happened around this date? What am I missing around this date? What am I excited about this date? And so I thought that it would be really wonderful on this talk with you to talk with someone who I think really brings to the plate joy and grief and says, here, let's embrace it. Let's be there with it. And as a grief counselor, one of the things that I talk to people about is that joy always lives in our heart. We never have to search it. We never have to look for it. And what happens when grief comes? How do we invite joy into that moment? And I believe that it's with intent of joy, with a thought, with one moment. And all we need is one moment of joy to help us get through the next moment and perhaps even bring a lot of moments of joy. So I have a friend and a very dear soul that I met a number of years ago at a different event. Something nothing to do with grief and nothing to do with joy. And within just a few moments, I felt a very deep connection with her. And then when she told me what she did, I knew why. I knew number one is that she lives through compassion. And Jeannie Blaustein is the founding chair of Reimagine, an organization that I love and an organization that really has given a platform to talk about mortality and grief and loss and joy and love and friends and family. It's just this wonderful platform. And for someone like myself, who, those of you that know that when I write morning inspiration, it's always about healing. There's something in there that was healing for me. There was an awareness. And in every moment of awareness, there's always an invitation to healing. And I thought, wow, I can connect with this woman on so many levels. And I've taken walks with her and I've talked to her and I've always learned something I didn't know about grief, about loss, about living, about love. And I really wanted to share this at this time about how do we embrace all these emotions. And Jeannie herself this year was touched by cancer, and she is a warrior, and she is really a role model on how you take joy and grief and put them together and still move forward. So here I'm welcoming Jeannie. Yay, so nice to have you here with me and my friends. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just share yourself right now.
First of all, good morning, good afternoon, Susan, and to all your friends who are here, Susan Lax and Friends. I know I'm one of those friends, and I know that there are many, many others out there watching. So thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you. So I am, by training, I'm a clinical psychologist, and interestingly, it was in my work as a clinical psychologist that I started to realize there were elements of life, of joy, of grief, of loss, of ritual that I really hadn't been trained for in my training. And I went back to school and actually got a degree in pastoral care and counseling at Hebrew Union College, and really began working in end of life, in hospice, in palliative care. I had grown up in a family where nobody talked about death and dying or loss or grief. And I just sensed that this was a huge part of life that I didn't feel fluent in, I guess maybe is the word. You know, we learn a language and we develop skillfulness in expressing ourselves. And I didn't really have that in this domain. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years, is really working closely with people who are at the end of life or are thinking about how to face the end of life when that time comes. And as you said, over this last year, I've been right up in front of that for myself, really facing the uncertainty of a serious medical diagnosis and what it means to live with joy at the same time that mortality is right there. And so that's kind of really brings me up to date. And I'll just share with you, because it feels so moving to be with you today. This is actually the 1-year anniversary of my diagnosis today. So it feels very real and very powerful to be having this conversation with you today.
Wow. Well, first of all, through all of you there, I need to send you a hug just for that. So I'm just sending it straight out to you.
Thank you.
So, you know, the first time that I was told or realized that joy and grief can be at the same moment was when I gave birth to my second daughter. And I was 25. And my father had passed away 3 weeks before. And nobody had talked to me about grief or what you do with grief. It was kind of just, this happened, move on. And maybe that was my upbringing in Israel, you know, under a generation of Holocaust survivors, be strong, move on. Or maybe it was that nobody talked about mortality or grief. And I gave birth on Purim, which is the Jewish holiday where everybody dresses up. And I gave birth in Hadassah in Jerusalem. And I remember walking in there and I was having terrible contractions, but my biggest fear was, how am I going to be joyous with this birth when I just lost my dad? And it was so fresh. So I hadn't even accepted that that was really happening. And everybody was dressed up because of this holiday at the hospital. And I remember walking through there and laughing. And then when I was in the room delivering, there was a doctor and a nurse. And I will never forget this, because I was crying while I was giving birth. And the nurse and the doctor okayed it. They said to me, cry. We know you just lost your father. And you can be joyous that this baby's going to come. It comes together. You can hold it. And in those words. And I remember taking that and feeling, oh my God, it's okay to be joyous and grieve and sad at the same time. And that was the first time that it kind of was brought into my heart consciousness and my heart awareness. And it was at that moment, I think, that I said, wait, something is going to happen with this. And I'm going to have to take this someplace. And I think that nurse and that doctor, wherever they are in the world today, really gave me that platform. That I knew that was something. And then a number of years after that, my mom died. And I needed to deal with, once again, that I didn't know how to deal with grief. So I want to ask you, what about Reimagine? And I've been to your events on Zoom and in person, and I've experienced them from a personal point of view. But I would love for you to share, because I remember there was one place that I went. It was at someone's house, and it was a vigil. And I remember I stood there, and I felt both joy and both grief. I really physically felt it in there, and it felt so good to acknowledge, to accept, because grief really never leaves. It just pops up at different times, just like joy never leaves, and it pops up at different times. So I would love for you to share, what is it that Reimagine does, and how do you how did you envision bringing this to people?
So, it's so interesting because I think that we often think that grief lives over here and joy lives over here. And I think the fact of the matter is that love, for example, love is grief. Grief is love. Without the love, the intensity, the attachment, the connection that we feel for someone or for a place or for a moment in our lives, whatever that is, we don't have the grief. They come completely intertwined. And I think at Reimagine, we've tried to really build that in. So I've had many, many friends and acquaintances, people who've sort of come to Reimagine events, sort of because I asked them to, or because they thought they should or something. But they're afraid because they don't want to talk about death. They don't want to think about grief. And I would say pretty much invariably, people walk out feeling uplifted, more grateful for their lives, more connected, because when we let ourselves kind of go into the grief, what comes is, as you said exactly, is joy, is relief, because this is a part of the human condition. They're not separate over here. We can't just cut that part out and sort of lean towards the parts that we like, because we know life doesn't work that way. Right. And so I think there's something so satisfying, so fulfilling about actually being in a place where everybody is acknowledging the truth, the simple truth that love and grief come together, that they are both inextricably a part of our lives, and that then to do that in community, as happens in a Reimagine event, or as happens at a shiva, or at a memorial service where we're there. And I remember my kids, early on in their lives, we would go to a shiva, and they would say, "Well, why are people laughing? Is it okay to laugh? Is it okay? My friend's mom is giggling." Of course, because first of all, part of the shiva is to remember the joy and the connection, and to look at pictures and to remember, what happened that day at the farm or whatever it is, And so we bring up, I think, all the range. I know someone who likes to say we can play the full 88 keys of the piano. We can't just play up here at one end. It's the whole piano. So right. I think your experience of giving birth to your daughter is such a poignant one. And that nurse and that doctor, they understood that those tears were tears of love, tears of sorrow, tears of excitement for what's to come, tears of remorse that your father wouldn't know this beautiful new person. Mm-hmm. All of it was right there in your tears.
Yes. And first of all, it's I love how you say that, love and grief are everything is really connected, because they're all experiences of life, right? They're all experiences. It's not, we don't experience life without ever facing grief or mortality, or we don't. And, it's just, that is the way the universe, or the power larger than us, has created us and the human race to be. And I think one of the things that, when someone says to me, I'm going to this celebration, or I'm going to a wedding, or I'm going to a holiday dinner, and I'm going to be with family, and I'm really going to miss not having that person. I'm going to feel it right then, right there, that moment. And I tend to tell them, feel it.
Yeah.
It's good. Don't push it away. Don't say, no, don't feel it. Don't put up that stop sign that sometimes we're told to say, no, it's done. It's over. No, feel it. because once we feel, we can feel so many emotions at the same time. And then we open the door to saying, hey, yeah, we can feel that love and that good. And you talked about the Shiva, which those of you who don't know is the Jewish tradition that we go for a week and we visit the grieving family and we go to them. And in my book, A Heart's Landscape, you know, between the lines, I don't always tell exactly what it is. There's a story there about the end of that happening and sitting outside. And I remember I drank a glass of wine after everybody had left, after my mom's Shiva, after a week of mourning with my community. And it was quiet. And I walked outside and I had a glass of very cheap wine. And I just laughed because I just felt, wait, that's okay. I can do this now. And at a table, when we're sitting, Jeannie, and we feel maybe that moment of emptiness, I try to say, what's the newness that we're bringing to that table? And it could be newness, a story about that person that nobody else knew or that I want to share. Or it could be a newness about something else. But I think sometimes, as someone I was talking to a couple of weeks ago said, don't mention the empty chair anymore. Don't let anybody empty, because then we're going to this place and we're going to feel that there's emptiness next to us. And I clicked and I said, you know, you're 100% correct. I really love that we don't keep that instead we feel, what is that, like you mentioned, that we're celebrating about this other person? What is that story that we're bringing there to the table? So in Reimagine, when you do these visuals and you do these beautiful, I want you to share, there's much more than just a visual. There's so much more that goes on. And I know this. I want you to share about the artistic part, because that always, for me, as someone who works in grief and talks about it a lot, that's really helpful for me. I find myself listening to those things on those Zooms and seeing, and then doing my own thing with it. So I would love for you to share about that part.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking. So just to give a little bit of context, Reimagine is essentially an umbrella organization that both hosts and then provides a space, a platform, as you said earlier, for other people to host events dealing with life, loss, love. And part of what inspired Brad Wolf, my co-founder, and me, was the idea that often things can be expressed creatively and artistically that are hard to say in words, and they can touch us obviously very, very deeply. And also that, as I said before, not everybody wants to go to a panel on hospice and palliative care. That's not really a big grab, but to go to a theater performance about suffering and what it means to relieve suffering, that's really what palliative care is all about. So to go to a theater performance where, for example, there's a wonderful theater troupe called Theater of War, and they happen to bring in really world-class actors who happen to have an afternoon free. And so you never know who you're going to get, because it happens to be who's in town. And they'll be reading Aeschylus, or they'll be reading something that has a profound question around mortality and life and value and what it means to live longer or to live shorter. And that really, and then to have a conversation after that, that's the kind of thing that we do. Because first of all, it brings people in, and it brings people in who kind of want to have the conversation, but maybe are a little bit, nervous about going there. And then it opens up through opening up your heart to these very profound questions that we all sit with. And, we can push them away. Many of us do. But at some point in life, either because of a diagnosis or a death, or, one of my very dear friends this morning shared that her dog, beloved 17-year-old dog, passed away this morning. And we know that these animals in our lives they're like sponges of love. They squeeze it out, they absorb it, they just keep giving and receiving love. And that's what this is really all about. right? It's about love. It's about waking up to the depth of that connection that we feel as human beings. And then we ask ourselves, at Reimagine, we have these ideas, these sort of principles. One of them is wonder.
Mm.
Who are we? Why is it that we are the only human beings that understand that our lives are time limited? What does that mean? How do we make meaningful use of that? Because yes, there's a loss, there's a separation, there's a death at the end, but in between, what do we do? As you say, how do we bring joy and gratitude for every one of those days into the life that we're living? And I know for me personally, in this year of diagnosis and treatment and blah, 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 all of that stuff, suddenly the end, possible ending seemed very close. And I don't know, we never know. My father died over 30 years ago in an accident. So there was no warning. There was no goodbye. There was nothing. We do not know. Many of us will see a horizon, right? And we'll have a chance to say the things that we want to say to people. But in the absence of that, how do we live each day really with the goal of awakening that heart, awakening our connection to ourselves and to other people? And this is so much what your beautiful work is about awakening that heart.
It's a heart attentiveness. That's really what it is. And, I think the more in my work, the more I live in my now. And I don't have wonderful nows all the time. Nobody does. But I do have at least one good now a day. At least one good now a day. And, I think that everybody with some intent can be with that one good that they have a day.
And how do you find it? If you're having a really dark day, how do you find your way to that one good now?
Okay, so I don't think we have to find it. I think it finds us. And I think that's a very different concept, Jeannie. I think the fact that we need to go out and find joy, or we need to go out and find a good moment, we're always going to be on this mission, and we're going to feel that we're failing if we're not finding it. And we're not failing. We are not failures. You can't be a failure in the classroom of joy. You cannot be a failure. And that is so important to remember that. And I think, but if you're having a really dark day, and it's really that, I think three things. One is accept that that's where you are. And it's okay that you're there. And don't put yourself down for being there. That's a really important part. But I think there's practice. Anything that we do in life, anything. Like I have to practice how to do these Susan Lax and Friends, right? I had to know how to do them because I didn't do Zoom calls. So with practice and bringing one moment of now, of joy into your day, it becomes part of who you are. It becomes part of who you are. And just like anything else, we then develop a heart treasure box or a soul treasure box that we can go back there when we need that moment, that we need that good moment, that now moment of gratitude. So, I've shared, I start my day with a smile every day. The first thing I do is smile. I don't run for anything else. And sometimes the smile is 2 seconds, and sometimes it lasts longer. And that smile, without talking, without reason, is a message that I'm in charge. I'm in charge of of one good moment. I'm in charge of that. And when we allow ourselves to be in charge of that, it becomes our practice to say, wait, you know what? I was walking today, and during my walk, and I saw a bird. That was my good moment. Yeah. That was my good moment. It doesn't have to be this unbelievable, extraordinary moment of changing the world, although I'd like to change the world a little bit today. But that's not going to be my good moment. And I think when we know two things, one, we have a treasure box of good moments once we practice them. We practice gratitude. Two, we have that person. We make sure there is that person somewhere, somehow, that when I have a dark moment and I really want a good one, I can say, can you just help me for a second? I need to invite a good moment.
Yeah.
And that's all, whoever that person may be.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been very fortunate and totally humbled by the experience that people have said, I've used your heart's landscape for that moment of good.
Well, I was just going to say your book is perfect. And I think of poetry as another, as a person, right? As something to go to. Your meditations, your inspirational writings, they provide that kind of that glimpse of light, you know, I'm looking at the screen that we're on, and there's this cloud above us, and it's kind of like,
Right.
oh, there could be an opening. And there's so many things in what you just said that I respond to, and I feel so connected to. And one of them is the idea of practice. And I think this is so vital. I think that we think somehow that we should be able to do all of this. We should be able to hold gratitude and find joy, as you said, and also manage grief, like that this is all somehow, because it's part of life, that we should all be able to do it. And I really feel like it's much more like going to the gym and, and building a muscle. So when, you know, I've had periods of my life when I have shared gratitudes with a friend, you know, at the end of the day, I would just text 3 gratitude things that I was grateful for at the end of the day to a friend, and she back to me. Or I've journaled it. Or during COVID, my family set up like a group chat, and we called it PLM, Pretty Little Moments. And just as you say, if we saw a bird or a flower or whatever, something that brightened our day, no matter how tiny it was, we would share it with each other. It was a way to stay connected. It was a way to remind ourselves that it's not the burning bush that we need to see. It's a tiny little blossom. And it really was, I think, like an exercise, building a muscle, a practice that made us all more aware. And, you know, this word gets used over and over these days, but really it's a mindfulness practice around how to be more present to what is. And, you know, the other thing that I've been thinking about as you were talking is that when we allow ourselves to feel whatever comes, whether it's the grief or the joy, there is a kind of intimacy that we feel with ourselves and with other people. So to be at a table, for example, where someone is missing, or where there is a sense of loss, it's one thing to sit there and feel that uniquely among yourself. And I'm not saying that everybody should come in with, you know, a banner talking about the person who's not there, but to be in a place of shared experience, to acknowledge the truth of that with other people creates an intimacy, because I believe truth breeds intimacy. You
100%.
just can't have that kind of closeness when you are pushing certain things away, because you can't only push away the things that you want. I'll tell you a tiny little story. When my sister was a little girl, my grandmother, I think she went to Albania, which, you know, in the 50s was not an easy place to get to. And she came home with this beautifully embroidered little dress. I don't even think I was born yet. But my sister didn't like some of the embroidered piece sections. So my mother came into the room and she saw my sister, who was probably 4, cutting out, you know, with the scissors, this beautiful little linen dress. And my mother said, "What are you doing?" And my sister said, "I'm cutting out the bad spots." And this has always been such a metaphor for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great metaphor.
Right? You can't cut out the bad spots. The dress is Done. You can't have that dress without the bad spots, which probably were gorgeous, by the way, but not to a 4-year-old's taste. So what does it mean to like have that dress, to have the bat, to hold it all with others? I think it creates intimacy with oneself, that we really know where we're at and what we're feeling. And it also has the potential to invite that kind of connection with other people.
Oh, so true. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that story, because I've taken it now. I'm now incorporating that in my soul library of metaphors. So thank you for that. And I hope your sister doesn't do that to dresses anymore.
No, now she's got much more respect for the craft.
That's great. But I do think the intimacy part that you talked about is really, really important to discuss, because it's through connections, right? And it's all about, I think the human spirit really needs connections, and connections that are made through intimacy and inviting intimacy are connections that make a difference, not only in the world, but in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think when we share that stuff that other people maybe don't want to bring it up. I have a very close friend who lost her husband, I want to say a year and a half ago, or close to 2 years now. Close to 2 years now. And she has been a role model for me in so many ways, because she's always incorporating laughter and grief in the same sentence. It's amazing to me. I sometimes think I wish I could take her and the way she's experienced this out front to show us has been, and I think one of the best things is that we mention him. It's not that we don't talk about him, that we mention him. And we mention when a picture comes up that, oh, his picture came up today. And I talk about it. And, another dear friend of mine, the same thing. I mention these things. And when I mention, it's an invitation. Oh, I can talk about it, but then we can go back to laughing. It's okay that we can go back to doing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's on us as well, as those that that are listening to this, and that it's not only our own grief, but we as compassionate human beings, one of the ways that we share compassion is being with someone in their moment of joy, right? Being with them, right? Without our story, and being with someone in their moment of grief without our story.
Right.
And that's hard, because we all have a story. But I always say that the truest good deed that I believe someone can do is to be totally immerse themselves in someone's joy or in someone's grief. And I believe that that is the intimacy that then continues to invite joy to visit, even when grief is there. And that's so true around the table at our holiday. Just let it be spoken. It's okay.
It's so interesting what you're saying, because, I think as a culture, and I know I'm sure everybody here represents many different cultures and subcultures, but we do kind of have this thing where when someone tells you what's going on with their lives, we often feel that the best way to connect with them is to tell them some version of that same story about our lives. It's like, oh, I lost my mother. Oh, I lost my mother too. Right. There is, of course, the experience of identification and having gone through stuff. And I will say that, during this year of my own cancer treatment, there have been times when talking to other cancer survivors and patients has been very helpful. But sometimes it's not really what somebody needs. Sometimes what people need, as you say, is somebody to accompany them, to simply accompany them without, as you say, without their own story. There's time for that. There's time for that in the future. But right now, what somebody needs is accompaniment. And, there is, in Jewish pastoral care, there's the concept of spiritual accompaniment. So what does it mean to sort of take that on as a sacred possibility to accompany somebody in their joy, in their grief, in their mix of all of it, in the mess, right? Really being in the mess with somebody, because that's usually what it is. And as I said earlier, that idea that people could be laughing or telling jokes at the moment that they are sort of technically in a grief practice, that is the messiness of life. And I think we don't want to be messy. We just really don't want to be, but mostly, and when we feel that way, we kind of want to clean it up, and we feel that we should clean it up. Our friends don't want to hear our mess. And I can say personally that what has been the most healing, and you used that word earlier, healing, and I truly mean this in a, not just a spiritual, but also I believe in a medical way, has been for me to be able to be fully in the mess of this really crazy year that I've lived. The mess, the hope, the fear, the joy, the utter lunacy of things going wrong, the unbelievable relief and gratitude when something goes right.
Yeah.
It's messy. Getting sick is messy. And having triumphs is fantastic. And you want to be able to do all of that. And that's what breeds intimacy, when somebody can just walk beside you in that experience and not have to insert their story at that moment. That is a gift. And because you know that when the shoe drops, when things shift, you know that you will be there for them. We don't have to be symmetrical at all moments. And I think we make that mistake. And I think we block intimacy when that happens. So I think
Yes.
there's something really powerful about allowing oneself, as you say, to step into somebody else's experience and show up in a wholehearted way that is really generous, actually. And to be on the receiving end of that generosity, I can tell you, it has healing properties. I would not be where I am today without that kind of joy and support and quiet and listening and humor. The humor, I'm sure we all know, but the humor is really one of the most powerful medicines I've ever experienced. And I think about joy and grief, and they're right there. That's what humor is. Humor is a mix, right? It's a mix of the dark and the funny and the human and the hilarious.
Thank you for sharing that about laughter and humor, because when we are too serious, or when we are just serious, we are not in the simplicity of just being. And I think that being in the simplicity of just being is where we can connect all those emotions, Jeannie, that you just talked about, that allows us to be the human spirit that we are, right? It's when we block it off and we make it so much more complicated. Messiness is not necessarily complicated. I think messiness can be because it's being in the simple. Yeah. It's just everything coming in at once like this.
Right.
And I think from my experience with working with people sometimes, where the seriousness of, well, what am I going to do? I need to know exactly how to get through the next moment. I know exactly how to deal with this. And there is no exact. There is nothing exact about being human. There's nothing exact about being human, And I think what you shared here about the messiness of your year this year is a phrase that I'm actually going to adapt. So thank you for that, because I think that when we think of messiness, we think that there's not just one thing, and it allows us to be all these things that we are, and it's okay, and to experience them all. And you know what? We can experience them at a holiday table as well.
Yeah.
And that's okay as well.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and, you know, I don't have to tell you this, and I'm sure most of the people listening here know there's no right or wrong with grief.
No.
There's no right or wrong. And there's no beginning and there's no really end, right?
Exactly.
It's always going around. And you know, you talked about a friend who lost their pet. And, you know, big time identify with that, right? I always tell Stephen, that was my love of my life, my Romeo. You know, for 17 years I had him. And,
Mhm.
you know, I think about him all the time and I miss him all the time.
Yeah.
But I talk about it. I don't
Hmm.
walk around and say, you know, and I actually just shared with Stephen yesterday that, you know, there's someone that I see, and every time I see them, that's who I think about
Mm.
because they loved my Romeo so much that every time there's that split second
Yeah.
and I think about it, and there probably is a split second of missing, but then
Hmm.
there's that moment of I smile, look how much joy he brought. All
Right.
right.
It's
And
beautiful.
yeah, so I think of that. And I wanted to tell everybody that as we're talking about these things, if you have questions or you have things you wanted to discuss, either with me or with Jeannie, you know, you can put that in the comments and someone will read it and see it. And you can also, Jeannie, how would someone be able to reach out to Reimagine if they'd like to know more about it?
So our website is letsreimagine.org, letsreimagine.org, or you can reach out to me, which is Jeannie, as spelled as it is here on the screen, at letsreimagine.org. So I'm happy to hear from anybody. And if you don't want to deal with me, that's 100% fine. You can just go right to our website, and there's a contact, spot to reach out for contact. And we'd love to hear from you. And,
Right.
one of the things that we encourage people to do is to think about creating an event yourself. So, as I said, we do create events. We have monthly vigils that mark COVID losses and other losses over the prior month. We have a number of things during the holidays. As Susan said, this is a particularly tender time where lots of feelings come up. But we also encourage folks to have their own events. So, for example, I have a friend who has started an incredible group called Daughters in Sanity. And it's really about daughters who are caring for parents who are experiencing cognitive decline. So they've hosted 3 events on Reimagine's platform for people dealing with parents with dementia and Alzheimer's and other kinds of cognitive decline. And so consider yourselves all invited. And Susan, that includes you as well, obviously, as this event is. To make use of our platform to reach more people with whatever it is that you're doing. And sometimes that might involve a yoga class that focuses on release and feeling, the tension and the pain and the grief and the relief of movement in our bodies. So all of these things are often fully woven in. So it's rarely one thing, as we were saying before. And that's what I love about the events and about the work itself.
Wow. So from here, I'm going to move on to something that I wanted to talk to you all about and tell you. So for those of you that were on Susan Lax and Friends last time, we had a surprise guest at the end, and Shira, and she sang with us, sang to us, not with us, although I hummed a little bit. She didn't really hear me because I have a terrible voice. But Shira is a songwriter and a singer, and her music is about healing. And all the words that she shares are really about healing. And I discovered Shira's voice, and I'm addicted. I'm addicted to her words. I'm addicted to her music. And Shira and I together are actually working on this wonderful piece performance where Shira is composing songs to my morning inspirations. And I can tell you that I cry every time I hear another song. It just moves me in ways that I cannot explain. And I will be reading from my morning inspirations, and we'll be jamming, and I will give you more details as they come. But for now, before I want to just say thank you, Jeannie, for being with us and for all your wisdom and your heart talk and your honesty and your intimacy. And you just make life better by being you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And for being in my life. And I really, right now, I want to, before I invite Shira to sing, because everybody's going to go, wow, I want to explain two things. One, I asked Shira to sing a song that's called Warrior. And that's her song. And I believe that anybody that's listening here is a warrior for different reasons in their life. But mostly it's when we're carrying grief and joy at this time of year. You're warriors. We're all warriors. And I wanted Shira to share that song with you. And for those of you that don't know, you can reach me at my website at susanplax.com. And my book, A Heart's Landscape, is available wherever books are available. And I think that Amazon, in their crazy way, just put it on sale. So go for it. And I also send out Morning Inspiration. It's a free newsletter 3 times a week with intent to maybe give you a good moment for my moments. So with that, I really would like to thank BookTrib for having us here. And with my other hat, those that don't know, I'm co-owner of Note Footwear, and for them being here on this with us. And so Shira, with no other words, it's you.
It starts with breathing, feeling one thing at a time. It starts with holding on for dear life. Look at me, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying and fighting every day. You gotta love what's broken before it can heal. I am warrior, I am warrior. You gotta keep on listening until you can hear. I am warrior, I am warrior. I am warrior, I am here. You're drowning, there isn't a lifeguard inside. No matter what they say, you're on your own. But look at you, staying and fighting every day. You gotta love what's broken before it can heal. I am warrior, I am warrior. You gotta keep on listening until you can hear. I am warrior, 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 I am here, I am here, I am here.
Like this, left me like this with so many emotions, and I'm holding them all here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Shira. Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you to all the listeners. And I am privileged and honored to have you all in my life. And I wish you one moment of joy. You can have it. Go get it.